Shalom, hello, this is Rabbi Johnny Solomon, the virtual rabbi. I hope you're well. This Shabbat we read Parshat Emor, and in this week's shiur we have numerous psukim and rashis and mefarshim for us to look through, learn through, enjoy, be enlightened by, and share, of course, Be'ezrat Hashem around the Shabbat table. As always, this shiur is dedicated in memory to my dear friend Lenny Borgi Yehuda Leib ben Shmuel. Let us begin. We begin early on in the first two psukim of Parshat Emor, where we're told the following: V'yomar Hashem el Moshe, Emor el haKohanim b'nei Aaron v'amarta alehem l'nefesh lo yitama be'amav. We're being taught here the rule that a Kohen cannot defile themselves, they cannot have contact with the dead, they cannot become tameh, they cannot have contact with tumat met. However, a Kohen can do so if their closest living relatives do pass away. On this, we encounter a beautiful perush of Rav Tzvi Hirsch of Liska, summarized by Rav Mordechai Cohen in his Sefer Al Torah, taking this verse to a Hasidic dimension, but one that really speaks to me. L'nefesh lo yitama be'amav ki im neshera korov elav. Haya Rav Hershel Miliska Omer. What did Rav Hershel of Liska say? Hayu ki'ilu katuv yitama b'fo'el yotzeh. It's as if the verse is saying it's going to happen as hara gdola leKohanim, and therefore it's here to warn the Kohanim, asher yoru mishpatei Hashem liYaakov v'Torato l'Yisrael, who are ultimately part of the clan, part of the tribe, who share Torah, who teach Torah, who represent Torah to the Jewish world. Shelo yehe b'libam shemesh shel sin'ah v'korot shel tin'ah klapei hapachot v'hagarua v'Yisrael tam'o l'hotzio. He explained this in such a profound way. He says, this isn't about the tum'at met. He says you can also explain it to refer to the tum'ah that comes into our hearts when we cancel other people, when we look down on other people, when we dismiss other people, when we think we're better than other people. And therefore the instruction is to the Kohanim to tell us, "L'nefesh lo yitama be'amav." Don't you dare do that to nefesh of Am Yisrael, to be betameh them, to basically to cast aspersions over them, to claim that they are less pure. Chalila, God forbid, mitoch klal Yisrael. The nefesh, kol nefesh, b'mashma mikol makom. This refers to any person, any Jew. Lo yitama be'amav leposlo b'mumo. Sure, nobody's perfect, but your task isn't to claim that that makes them less a great person or a lesser great Jew. Or af lefaglo b'machshavato. Don't even think about such an approach. Don't even, consider such an idea. If the Kohen sees any lacking, any gap in the knowledge or compromise in the practice of another person, this should be understood to reflect back on his family, namely Tlezot Bo. The Kohen should attribute it to himself, because that was his task to teach Torah. That was his task to be an ambassador of Torah and of Judaism. So you can see here a very, very interesting rereading of the pasuk. Ultimately, this is an instruction to the Kohanim. Don't be posel any Jew. Your task is to see the good in everybody. Every nefesh is a holy nefesh. Every person can be a holy person. And if they've got things missing in their knowledge or things lacking in their practice, maybe it's because we, the Kohanim, or those representing Torah education, haven't done enough. Let's move on to the next pasuk. V'shamu et mishparti lo yisrael alav chet umetu bo ki chalaluhu ani Hashem hakadshim. You shall keep my charge, not bear a sin by eating it, by unclean, and thereby die through it. Rashi explains to V'shamut mishparti mlechol truma b'tumat aguf. Here, this is the warning to the Kohanim not to eat truma in the state of tum'ah, not to eat the tithes that are given to them in a state of spiritual impurity. On this, Rabbi Yocham Leibovitz in his Dat Torah says the following: V'shamut mishparti v'Yisrael alav chet u'v'Rashi muvu'ar ki katuv nidrash lamdenu al achilat truma b'tumat aguf. He quotes Rashi saying this is to teach us about not eating truma in the state of tum'ah. And in fact, that this is punishable b'dei shamayim. He says, but within this same law, I see a further allusion, a further teaching, a further hint to an extra lesson. It's not just to say that you shouldn't eat the truma that you receive in a state of tum'ah. Instead of a shamuot mishmarti, be careful in your service, because that shouldn't come to doing chet. If you recall, that echoes the words in Parshat Kedoshim, again. So what it's telling us is, through your service, be very careful that you don't do things that in fact are not good for you, not good for others. The byproduct of your avodah shouldn't be one which is negative. He says, and this is a lesson not just to Kohanim, but to each of us, that when people are involved in mitzvah observance, make sure that when you do your mitzvahs, do it for the right reasons, and try and avoid that any negative outcome could come from it. Make sure that you have the right intentions, and so that when you're doing a mitzvah, you don't come, unfortunately, to shame others, you don't come, unfortunately, to upset others. You do so in a way that brings joy and goodness to the world. That's a gadlus of Rabbi Yerucham. How beautiful. Moving on, we're taught, here we have the verses about the prohibition of Chilul Hashem and the requirement of Kiddush Hashem. Of course, these mean different things. The ultimate Kiddush Hashem is giving up your life for the observance of mitzvot. The ultimate Chilul Hashem is causing other people to turn away from their observance. And on this, Rabbi Yehuda Amital has a beautiful piece in his book, Jewish Values in a Changing World. He says, the name of God is desecrated when a person who studied Torah fails to relate to the other people in a fitting manner. The sanctification of his name is just the opposite. It takes place when the name of heaven becomes beloved through him. Chazal teach us that the name of heaven becomes beloved not only when we produce articles, debates, and sermons, meaning when we talk Torah, but first and foremost when one serves as a role model of moral and humane behavior, which generates admiration and emulation by others. A special obligation, here he's talking to students of Yeshivat Har Tzion, falls upon students of Torah to make the name of heaven beloved to other people. That's our task, to make a Kiddush Hashem, to make sure that people say, aha, this is the way to be. And this goes back to what we said in Al Torah with Yerucham as well. We should never see any lacking in others, kol nefesh, and everything which we do should be that it brings about a good outcome. Let's come towards a close and focus on the mitzvah of Shabbat. In fact, the Torah begins by talking about the festivals, but then addresses the laws of Shabbat. At this verse, where we're taught about the holy days which should designate as holy occasions, you'd expect the Torah to now talk about the festivals. But then we're taught, etc. The verse talks about Shabbat. We're going to come to this in just a second. Rashi here, by the way, says, Sheshet Yamim, Ma inyan Shabbat etel moadot, lalamdecha, shekol mechalelet moadot, ma'ala alav ki'ilu chilelet ha-Shabbatot. Basically, there seems to be a synergy between the festivals and Shabbat, such that Rashi comes to say that whoever desecrates the festivals is as if considered that they've desecrated Shabbat. Whoever fulfills the festivals, as if they've fulfilled the Shabbat. But why is it that the verse begins by talking about the festivals and then goes on to discuss Shabbat? And also, what can we learn here about Shabbat? So let's begin with the Emet Yaakov of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. Ma shektim leParshat HaMoadot et HaShabbat. The fact that Shabbat is mentioned here as Rosh Rishana of all the Moadot, nir'eh li be'emet kol umah v'lashon yesh lahem regalim moadim shonim. He says every nation, every people, every culture have their own festivals, their own holidays. Im ken bichdei shelo tit'eh shegam moadot shelanu gam ken kechol moadei hagoyim hem. So as not to think that our festivals are just like all the other festivals. Hikdim shebil'adei haShabbat en shum chashivut moadechem. Shabbat is mentioned first, because without Shabbos, there aren't the Moadim. And that's what Rashi is alluding to, about that connection between the Moadim and Shabbat. Shabbat demonstrates how we're not just like any other people, just having different holidays and festivals. In fact, our calendar and our lifestyle is different. Isn't that fascinating? But this now brings us to the Tosefet Bracha, our final commentary for this week's shiur. Shabbat hi LaHashem b'chol moshvotechem. Hakavat ha'lashonot mikdushat LaHashem im b'chol moshvotechem lo nimtza b'chol moadim. He says here we have this coming together of expressions in terms of Shabbat hi LaHashem b'chol moshvotechem. He says, how come we don't use this language about all the other festivals? Rak Shabbat. And he says, I'd like to suggest a reason. The fact is that the festivals were most potently expressed, most visibly seen in Yerushalayim when Am Yisrael did Aliyah L'Regel. אז נראה שם ביותר כבוד השם וקדושת היום, מה שאין כן בארצות הגולה בחוץ לארץ. But the festivals, even inside Israel, but not in Yerushalayim, and certainly outside of Israel, they're felt differently. In fact, those festivals are commemorated almost as a zeicha of what was done in Yerushalayim. But Shabbat en kedushata tluya b'Yerushalayim. Shabbat is not interrelated with the Yerushalayim experience. Ki im b'chol makom b'chol zman. Shabbat is felt equally the same wherever you are, whether you're in an island somewhere, whether you're in Israel, whether you're in a Jewish community in the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, South Africa, Europe, whatever. It's the same. Because this isn't a historic festival. It reminds us about creation itself. Therefore, with the festivals, even though they're holy to God, there's a measure of difference between the sanctity felt of the festivals within Yerushalayim and elsewhere, which is not the case with Shabbat. So let's quickly summarize and have a look through the verses we saw again. We talked about the pasuk lenefesh lo yitamar be'amav, and we saw this gorgeous explanation by Rav Hershel and Miliska to say, not just to Kohanim, but ultimately to all of us, let's not try and look for a pagam of somebody else, of what chaser, what is lacking in them. In fact, kulam kudoshim lenefesh, every soul radiates, every soul is holy. We went on and we saw Rabbi Yerucham, and he says, in your avodat Hashem, make sure you try and make sure that what comes out of it is something good, because sometimes you can do a mitzvah and it can lead to causing others unease. Be careful about that. Think about that carefully. Overall, this broader message comes through from Rabbi Amital, who says, Lo tchalu v'nikdashi b'toch b'nei Yisrael. Don't make a chilul Hashem, do kiddush Hashem, and make sure that we make the Shem Hashem beloved throughout the rest of the world. And then we spoke about Shabbat. Shabbat being the distinction between us and the rest of the peoples, because they have festivals, so they don't have Shabbos the way we have. And secondly, Shabbat is different to the festivals, because the festivals are felt differently in Eretz Yisrael, especially in Yerushalayim, to other places, especially in the diaspora, where Shabbat is felt in the same measure, or can be felt in the same measure, wherever you are. I wish you Shabbat Shalom.